From the great American Central Plains and the rolling prairies of Kansas, I bid all of you warm greetings, wherever you are in space and time. This is Kevin Kelly. Welcome to Midnight on the Prairie. Great to be here, everybody. I'm just so glad to have you all aboard for what should be a most intriguing, thought-provoking show. So I'm going to be telling you a story, one I briefly referred to in the opening trailer for this show. And it is a true story, something I personally experienced. It surrounds what I've come to refer to as a vision dream that came to me one night, approximately 50 years ago, in 1974, when I was only 11 years old. So the details of my vision dream echoed a tragic event that was affecting my father's friend and colleague, Earl, and all that was unfolding out here in the awake world at the same time as my dream. Now, part two of my story occurred 27 years later, in 1991. In this episode, I will for the first time be sharing this entire experience with all of you, and I will also be sharing it for the first time with Earl's son, Mike. And there's one last twist, if you will. So the very next week, after I decided to create this podcast and to include this story in it, I randomly ran into Mike close to 50 years since the last time I had seen him or spoken to him. Even though we both lived here in this town of about 100,000, and much less years ago, all of these years never ran into each other. Indeed. So, my friends, without further ado, I'll be sharing my story in just a moment at Midnight on the Prairie.
Unique jewelry is what sets your outfit apart from others. It can make an everyday outfit shine, but too often the jewelry people wear isn't really noticed because it does not stand out. I want to tell you about a family-run online jewelry store called Buy Rock Studio that crafts unique, one-of-a-kind beaded jewelry that will be noticed and that you'll love to wear. It features everything from necklaces and earrings to bracelets and anklets. Rox's jewelry is so unique it caught the eye of Sports Illustrated, who went on to adorn its swimsuit models with Rox's work for the May 2023 swimsuit edition. So head on over to buyrockstudio.com to find your own amazing jewelry pieces and shine. Again, that's BYROXSTUDIO.com. And thank you, Rox, for your support of Midnight on the Prairie.
Hello, Mike, and welcome to the show. I'm just really excited to have the opportunity to finally tell you this story. And I know you've been patient because you and I ran into each other about a month and a half ago, and I told you I had a story to tell you about your father in the night of his stroke.
Right.
So thanks for being patient.
Well, hey, thanks for coming up with telling me about this. I'm so glad we encountered one another so that I can find out about this story. I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Well, you know, I don't think it was a random thing, and I agree. I feel that's also the case in terms of you and I reuniting. Mm-hmm. It's kind of almost like a full circle, because I've not been able to convey this story to a member of your family all these years, right?
Right.
And
right.
now, because we happened to run into each other the week after I decided to make a podcast and to feature this in it, to me, that's just too much. That's just not coincidence. To me, there's some kind of a message there too. I really believe.
Yeah, I would agree.
Right. So we know it would have been 49 years ago. And here's what happened 49 years ago when I was approximately 11 years old. I was, of course, living at home with my parents, and my bedroom was in the basement. And I started to have what was a very vivid dream. And here's what it was. Suddenly, I am in seemed like a high school gymnasium, perhaps, or a junior high, where you have the gym, and at the end of the gym, there's kind of a stage. On the floor of the gymnasium, there were metal bleachers, and they were facing the stage. I was sitting on them up near the top, and my father was sitting right next to me on my left. And there were other people with us, around us. On the stage was a coffin and a piano. all of a sudden, the coffin starts to open, and a hand grips the side of it, and the person sits up in the coffin, and it's your father. And I turned to my dad and I said, "That's Earl Schertz." He said, "It is." Your father proceeds to get up out of the coffin, and he stands on the stage in front of us, and he begins talking. I don't remember the specific words. I wish I did. But I do remember that it was extremely profound, and it was about love, and it was about family, and it was about life. And as I was listening to this, I was very affected by it, and my father was too. Then your father walked across the stage over to the piano, pulled out the bench, sat down, and played an absolutely amazing piece. I remember it still kind of echoing through that room, and everybody was just kind of caught up in it, and it was beautiful, and it was flawless. And then he was done. I remember kind of the last notes fading away. And he got up, he walked back over toward where the coffin was, and he thanked people for being there, and he got back in the coffin and closed the lid, and I woke up. Now, when I woke up, it was still, I think, in the nighttime. It wasn't time to really get up yet. But when it was, I remember I then went upstairs and I went into the kitchen, and my mom was standing at the sink. And as she turned to me, I could tell she was upset about something. It was written all over her face, pale, upset, maybe not sleeping much that night. And I said, "Mom, is something wrong?" And she said, "Yes, a terrible thing happened last night." And I said, "Stop, don't tell me. I think I know. It was about Earl Schertz, wasn't it?" She's kind of gasped. "How did you know?" And I said, "Well, I had a dream last night." And I told her the same story I told you. And then my mom said that essentially what had happened was your father had a very serious stroke that night. So serious, in fact, that at least once he had flatlined, essentially passed away, but was revived. And I started thinking how that was also very similar to my dream, because in my dream, at the beginning, he was in the coffin as if he had passed. But then he got out of it, as if revived. So in that same time frame, right there following the stroke, my father told me an interesting story, and it was to the effect that while your father was still there at the hospital recovering, he surprised the doctors and the staff because he got up out of bed one day and he walked down the hall to a common area and he played the piano flawlessly.
After his stroke, he was still able to play. He would remember some of the songs he wrote. Yeah, he could still play.
Isn't that something? So much like my vision dream again, where he gets up out of his coffin, walks across the stage, plays an amazing piece on the piano. Okay, now for part 2 of my story, we're going to fast forward from 1974, the year of the stroke, to the year 1991. I'm now an attorney, fully grown. I had lived out of town, but I came back home. I was at my parents' house, and I'm at the kitchen table, and I see my mom at the kitchen sink, like she was that day way back when. And somehow seeing her there in that position reminded me of this dream and that morning that I had come up and told her about my dream. And so I asked my mom, I said, "Mom, whatever happened to Earl Schertz?" Because I'd kind of lost track. She said, "Well, Kevin, I think he's over in Eudora at the Eudora Nursing Center." At that moment, I had such a feeling come over me of purpose. I guess a person could say it was almost a religious kind of moment, a spirit entering me. All I know is that suddenly my own perception of things shifted, and only one thing mattered. I needed to go see your father. And so I told my mom that. I said, "Well, I got to go see him." And she goes, "Why?" I said, "I don't know. I have to go." She said, "Would you know where the nursing center is?" I said, "No, but I will find it." Went out to my car. I started driving to Eudora. Now, of course, Eudora is about 6 miles away. It doesn't take long. I got on that highway, and I'm not a particularly religious person in a, denomination kind of way. But if there is such a thing as the Holy Spirit or a God touching you and interacting, that's what happened to me. Because I literally could feel and almost envision, I felt like a bubble around me of protection, a purpose higher than any purpose I'd ever felt in my entire life. I almost envisioned there was a hand pushing me down the road, protecting me to get me there. And I knew in my mind it didn't make any sense. It was irrational in a way, but it didn't matter. I couldn't battle it. I couldn't fight it. I didn't know where the nursing center was, but it didn't matter. When I got to Eudora, 2 or 3 turns, pulled up, there it was. So I parked. I walked in. It's set up, where you walk in and there's a nursing center right when you walk in, and then there's a wing that goes to the left, to the right, and then one goes straight, as I recall. I didn't know where he was. I walked in. They said, "Can we help you?" But you know what? I knew I didn't need any help. I said no. And I went straight and was 100% confident that was the right way to go, because this thing was still with me. This feeling I had was still there. I walked to the end of that hallway. I believe you could go either left or right. I knew exactly where to go, to the right. So I turned to the right. And as I turned to the right, there was a doorway on the right, and I knew to go exactly to that doorway and stop. And as I stopped and I looked in that room, it was like a cafeteria. And there was one man sitting there, and it was your father. I couldn't believe it. I could barely recognize him. I mean, I hadn't seen him in so many years, and he was quite a bit older. Right about that time, he got up out of his chair, and he walked toward me. Barely made eye contact. He kind of walked past me, kind of shuffling, going down the hall. So I followed him. He went down a few doors, and then he went in to a room. It was his room. He went in, and there was a lazy boy recliner. I remember it distinctively, and he sat in it. And I am standing in the doorway. And at that moment, that whole feeling I had just kind of melted away, and I was back to myself again. And your father looked up at me, and you know what he said? "Hi, Kevin." He knew exactly who I was, even though I was from 11 years old to 26 or whatever it was at that point. I said, "How did you know who I am?" "Well, you're Bill Kelly's son." I said, "You're right. I am. I just am surprised you recognized me." "Oh, of course." He said, "So why are you here, Kevin?" And I said, "Oh, I don't really know. I don't know why I'm here. I'll tell you what's happened leading to this point, if you would like." And he said, "Sure." I mean, just the most conversational you can imagine. So I told him everything I've just told you about the dream, about getting there that day. And I said, "So maybe you can tell me why I'm here." And I'll never forget, he kind of rubbed his chin. He goes, "Very interesting, Kevin. Very interesting. Yeah, I think I know why you're here." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Kevin, I remember that night when something happened in my head," is how he put it. He said, "I think what happened is as that was happening to me, I think I thought of your father, and you intercepted it. Your father and me had been very, very good friends for many years, but we had a falling out. And he said, frankly, it was my fault. I started drinking more, and your father didn't want to go out and drink, and I kind of pressured him, I think, and there was some tension, and because of that, we had really moved apart. We had really become distant. I always felt bad about it because, Kevin, I really loved your father. I mean, he was like a brother, and I felt bad about it." I said, "Wow, I guess that would make sense then." I said, "Earl, let's go call my father. There's a payphone at the end of the hall. Let's go call him, and you can tell him this stuff yourself." So we got up and we walked down there, and I put the money in. And I remember calling him. My mom answered the phone, and I told her where I was, and she's like, "Kevin, I couldn't understand it. You left acting so strange. I'm glad you're okay. Your father's here. I'll put him on." So she put him on the phone, and I told my father what had happened and that I was with your dad, and your dad would like to say something to him. Well, much like my whole demeanor had shifted in the doorway, your father's did then. He just reverted to, I guess he was not able really to communicate and talk. And I remember he just looked much older all of a sudden, and he was confused, and he wouldn't say a thing when I held the phone up there, and I said, "Earl, could you tell him?" And he didn't even seem to understand what I was talking about. So I told my father, "I don't know what happened. I'll explain when I get home." And I hung up, and I took your father back to his room, and he didn't really know what was going on from what I could tell. He had forgotten who I was or why I was there or what we talked about. So I came home and I told my father, and he got on the phone and called your mom and told her, Mary. My recollection at that point was your mom was very confused and surprised because, as she put it to my father, Earl had not spoken coherently to anybody about anything in a long, long time. Well, then, of course, the real final twist to this whole story is your father died that month.
January 15th. Yeah.
Okay, yes, January 15th. Of course, that was 1991. The stroke was 1974. So it took 17 years from the night that I intercepted the message from your father for me to then finally be able to deliver it to my father in 1991. It was around the 10th of January, as I recall. Your father passed away on the 15th of January, 1991, about 5 days after that message finally being delivered. And to top it off, your father was just so incredibly with it, coherent, kind, warm, and I think it was kind of a final thing for him to check off on his list before he passed. And then he did. Mission accomplished. I can now move on.
Yeah, well, that's pretty amazing. I know when you said, when you went home in January of 91, I thought, well, that's the month my father died, and then it was the 15th. Within those few days, pretty darn close to the 15th. That's pretty. And I know as you were talking about him being pretty lucid and so forth, that just seemed to contradict my memory. As the days had worn on, he became much quieter, and so pretty amazing. It triggers me in that I was with my mother when she passed away. She died in 96, and I was in the hospital room with her at the time, and a couple of her friends came in to see her, and she, by this time, was pretty much quietly out of it and breathing normally. And I know the nurse standing by, too, said, what a beautiful death, because Mother was beginning to leave us. And her two friends came in just to kind of pay their respects. And I swear, when they turned around to leave, and I, too, am not really of a hugely religious persuasion. It was just, at that moment, I looked over at my mother. She relaxed. That's when she passed away. And I swear, it seemed like there was something that left her that wandered out and followed her friends out the door. Like, I don't know, an apparition or some sort of maybe kind of a visual wind with kind of, I don't know, just a very, something I'd never experienced before, nor have I since.
Right.
So kind of along the lines, in a way, of things that you can't really seemingly explain, but you experience.
If you've had it happen, these things can happen.
Yeah.
I don't know. In a way, I think I'm feeling a sense of closure. Your dad got it out there. Yeah. It came to me. I got it to my father.
Yeah.
And then today, 49 years later than the night of the stroke, I've been able to convey this amazing story to you, Mike, Earl's son.
That's a pretty amazing situation, experience you had, and wonderful to know it here because, wow. Yeah, Well, thank you. Thank you for the gift. Yeah, that's really, really, really wonderful.
Well, thank you.
Well.
And, I'm just beyond that, just so glad that we ran into each other.
As am I.
And we've been able to rekindle all this and bring our families back in touch and back together again.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I think that all of our parents up there, your parents and mine, would be, and probably are, looking down saying, did that just happen?
Well, it's a wonderful thought, and who knows, and why not? But let's kind of suppose that's happening.
Yeah. Well, thanks again. And
well, this is just pretty amazing.
Well, my friends, there you have it. My retelling of my vision dream. I hope you enjoyed it. And of course, Mike's reaction to it. So Mike and I got together before the show to kind of, reconnect and talk about our families and our lives. and he told me a most curious story I wanted to share with you. So back in the 1970s, leading up to his father's stroke in 1974, his father was struggling with high blood pressure, not uncommon. But what do you suppose his doctor prescribed to deal with it? Drinking whiskey. Yeah, that's right, which probably only made the high blood pressure worse, might very well have contributed to the stroke, and now we know certainly did not help things between his father and mine. You also probably noticed from Mike's voice and his demeanor, gosh, what a kind, warm man, just like his father. I would love to hear your thoughts and comments about this show. You can always contact me at kevinkelly@midnightontheprairie.com or on Facebook, Midnight on the Prairie. And if you have not yet subscribed to this podcast, please do. It would mean a lot to me. I do want to thank Mike for allowing me to tell this story to him and the world at the same time on a recorded podcast. Pretty amazing, right? And I also want to thank our sponsor, that's byrocksstudio.com. Please check out their work. You'll be glad you did. So my friends, until next time, remember that wherever you are in space and time, here it is always midnight on the prairie.